Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here, even though there are all kinds of temptations out there. There's wine and beer and all this other stuff. You probably have seen a lot of Comcast at this conference, and you've probably heard from a number of fantastic speakers throughout the week. And tomorrow you will hear from Greg Otto on the keynote stage as well. But what we wanted to do today, Shilla and I, is to give you more of a general description of how the company has transformed itself and how it's embraced open source software, which is one of the fundamental elements you need, if you will, to start using technologies like Cloud Foundry, like CNCF, and other kinds of technologies in the cloud. So with that, let me get started. I want to start off by introducing myself. I'm Nithya Ruff. I'm the Senior Director of the Open Source Practice at SanDisk, at Comcast. I used to be at SanDisk. And the Open Source Practice is a brand new element in our transformation. And I'll introduce a little more about why we started the Open Source Practice, what the mission of the Open Source Practice is, and how it helps transform the company into being more of a software company, more of a technology company. And so introducing Shilla here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shilla Saebi, and I work on the open source practice team. I am a community manager for all open source at the company. I've been with Comcast for about 7 years, and just joined the team about 6 months ago. I recently moved to Philadelphia, and I'm first time at a Spring Forward conference. Super excited to be here, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Yep, I completely echo Shilla's words. Okay, one of the first questions that we often get asked at this conference is, why is Comcast here? And what are you guys doing here at Spring One? What's your connection to Spring One, and do you use it? You mean you actually use Spring One platform or Cloud Foundry? And I think many of my colleagues are doing talks throughout the week, which will explain to you how we use it in our business transformation, how we use it in our ops, and how it's delivered fantastic results for us, and at what scale we use it, at what production level we use it. But we're not going to touch upon the details of our actual implementation in this particular presentation. But what we will touch upon is the fact that digital transformation is affecting all companies. And it certainly affects us. Every company is embracing software, particularly open source software, to transform itself, to adopt more software-defined media, software-defined everything, right? And sometimes it's driven by competition, because you see new entrants into the marketplace who are using new ways of delivering the technology that you were delivering, with Amazon and how they entered the book space and how they started delivering books through the online method, and drove out a lot of companies from this business. And sometimes it is newer models, newer technologies that make themselves available, such as the cloud, such as IoT, such as big data, that gives you a chance to reinvent yourself, to make you digitally transform yourself as a company. And last but not the least, it truly is a connected world, and no one company can solve problems by themselves. And so this method of collaborative development, collaborative open source, is important for companies to embrace if they are to transform themselves in this digital world. And that's exactly what we've done. We've transformed ourselves into a digital and a technical and an IP networking and software company. And clearly, the fact that open source software is so plentiful and is available in so many different areas is not lost on us. When you have source code available that you can actually access and you can actually modify and use to transform yourself, to innovate faster, to save money, to get to market faster, it becomes easier to become a software company. And open source software has really opened the door for many a company. And you heard from Ford Motor Company, you have financial companies transforming themselves, you have fintech, and you have certainly media companies like ourselves who are also transformed by open source software. These numbers really stun me, and these came from the Linux Foundation. 64 million repositories on GitHub. Clearly not all of them are important, all of them are useful to all of us, but there is plenty of software out there that can be a starting point for projects, that can be a starting point for innovation in any company, and we are making full use of that as well. And particularly interesting to me is the fact that if you look at every single trend in the industry, from blockchain and trusted ledgers to big data analytics and insight to IoT, mobile, cloud, AI, every single arena that we are interested in as a company, for instance, and lots of companies are interested in, the fastest innovation and the most disruption is happening through collaborative open source development. And in the cloud space, last week was reInvent, but then even Amazon is embracing open source and has started an open source practice. And you can also see CNCF and the KubeCon conferences going on at the same time as Spring One. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation, tremendous amount of disruption happening in this space in open source. So it's no longer optional for any company, including ourselves, to sit on the sidelines and not embrace open source. In fact, over 78% of companies are run on open source, and they use open source in their infrastructure, in their products, in their service. They start with kind of an open source core, and then they add value, and then they deliver these products to their customers. It's a competitive advantage. If you don't use open source, you cannot get to market fast. You cannot innovate and add value where you need to add value. So it's become a business imperative for us as well to embrace open source and to be an open source supporter. So one of the first things that I wanted to share with you is kind of a timeline of our journey to becoming more of a software company, becoming more of a technology company. It really started around the turn of 1999, 2000, when we were consuming some open source software and some software that we were modifying or using, but mostly we were buying off-the-shelf products from vendors and implementing these off-the-shelf products, like many of us, right? Just integrating and implementing it and operating them. And we would provide our requirements to these vendors, and we would wait on them to understand the uniqueness of our industry or what we needed to have done. And the speed of innovation was accelerating so much that by 2006, we decided that we needed to take destiny into our own hands and start using and contributing to open source software ourselves. No one understood our industry as well as we did. No one could really understand the specific needs we had and get to market faster. So we started consuming more open source around the 2006 timeframe. The real fast acceleration happened between 2006 and 2017 when we introduced the X1 platform, and introduce many innovations in our network, in our content distribution, in how we analyze data, how we serve customers. And frankly, we've not only consumed a lot of open source, but we contribute a tremendous amount of open source back to communities, as well as start new projects and start leading certain projects. For example, the Apache Traffic Control Server, which is a CDN, content distribution network project, was started by Comcast, completely open sourced as an incubation project under the Apache Foundation. And there are numerous contributors here in the room who have contributed to Spring One and to Cloud Foundry from the company. And Shilla will explain more where you can learn more about some of the contributions we have made. So this, for me, is a fantastic chart because it shows where we transformed the way people watch TV. And for most of us, the TV is the community space where the family gathers and watches shows every evening or during the weekend. And for us, it was the same in my family. And very often we'd have 3 remotes sitting on our coffee table. We'd have the Apple remote, we'd have the TV remote, and we'd have the cable remote. And it was such a pain in the neck, frankly, to go back and forth between my cable subscription to Netflix, to going to other shows or searching for content on YouTube, et cetera. And it was transformational in our house, I know, and in many, many households, when X1 came out and we had a voice remote where I could search using a very natural, intuitive interface like voice for aggregated content and content that was curated across all of these modalities, Netflix, YouTube, as well as your cable. And frankly, you often find that shows are, the past season shows are in one place and the current season shows are in another place. And you also find that 3 or 4 channels are offering a show at different prices. So I have an opportunity to actually search and consume my content in a more effective fashion. We also found that the world was moving to more streaming apps, and we introduced streaming video and on-demand in 2013. And every X1 consumer gets streaming apps and streaming application on their mobile phone or on their iPad, rather. And you can stream it on the air like Shilla does, or you can stream it in your room. So this is something that we did with 30 billion on-demand video streams so far. The other piece that's really fascinating, and I think all of us would agree that it's, having internet access now is like breathing air. And my kids, I have 2 young kids in their early 20s, and as soon as the internet goes down, they scream. And it's almost primal that you have access, and it's on at home. And we've been delivering fast, high-speed internet and innovating on one of the largest IP networks in the world over the years. It's all built really on a multi-cloud, multi-tenant, cloud-based application platform. It's a mouthful, I guarantee you that. And IP broadcast-grade video. And this really, now when you peel away the onion of the beautiful Comcast logo, you really see that it's technology behind it. It's cloud, it's CDN, it's business analytics, it's machine learning, it's AI, it's embedded applications based on Linux in the set-top box, it's mobile applications, so we're really transformed into a software company. And that's one of the things that excited me to come work at Comcast, was that as an open source person, I could really engage in multiple communities working at Comcast. So one of the things that we embarked on was that when you transform yourself digitally, it means culture change, how we develop products, how we interface with customers, how we communicate. It's also a brand image change, and it's also a practice change. So the tools we use, the development practices, the hiring practices, everything starts changing as a company. And this is something that the open source practice also is a key part of. And I'll explain a little more about what that means. So it was in 2017 that we reached a point where we were doing so much open source that we said we really need to start a center of excellence inside the company that was an open source program office or a practice that would help the company accelerate its adoption of open source throughout the company. So I call it 6 C's, which means I break it down into we are responsible for creating awareness inside the company, creating awareness outside the company through communication of our open source work, of how to use open source. We make it easy for our engineers to consume open source, through policies, processes, tools, make it easy to contribute, reduce the friction in the process of contribution, make it easy to collaborate with other companies. Once upon a time, you'd have to sign NDAs, you'd have to join standards bodies, you had to join associations to even collaborate with another company. And now through open source foundations and open source organizations like this, we are able to collaborate very, very easily. But also responsible for helping teams build competency in how to consume open source, what a license is, how do you maintain a project, how do you contribute to a project, et cetera. And then last but not the least, comply with the obligations that licenses bring. we believe that a mark of respect for open source and communities is to comply with the licenses that we use. So this is really the charter of my group. As you can see, it touches on culture, it touches on brand, it touches on practices inside the company. And so we really, our customer is the engineer, is the developer inside the company, and we work very closely with them to make this happen. Some of the key changes we've brought about, we really helped streamline the compliance process. Engineers, by nature, do not want any friction in the process. And our job is not to introduce any new friction. It's also to help them deliver products to their customers and not interfere with that process. So we've worked hard to streamline the whole compliance process. The second one is wherever OSS, open source software, is critical to the business, we want to make it easy to connect with those communities. And Shilla will explain a little more about how we connect with communities as a company, especially those communities where we are very dependent upon the community from a software perspective. Talent acquisition has become more and more important as developers are keen to know what is the culture inside the company, how supportive is the culture of open source practices, will the company allow me to contribute to open source, can I bring my project that I worked on from before into the company? And so we are making it very clear that we are a developer-friendly company, easy to work with, we support you when you do open source work. We've helped scale some of the processes that were there. Often companies end up having one-off processes for dealing with different things. And when you are a very large company, you need to make it scalable, you need to make it repeatable, you need to make it part of the workflow so people don't have to do one more additional thing in order to get a product out. And last but not the least, and I'll be transferring over to Shilla shortly, it's important to create a culture of innovation, an open innovation, where you collaborate openly across the company, but also collaborate outside the company with communities in order to innovate faster. And so this is something that we work very hard on. It's not something that happens overnight. And Shilla will give you some examples of areas where we've made this easy from a community perspective, and both internal communities as well as external communities.
So open source consumption is not the only thing, I guess, that's tied with open source. Open source community collaboration is also really, really key, and we find that getting our developers enabled to contribute back to open source communities is really important. So what are open source communities anyway? Open source communities are groups of individuals that are working towards a common interest. Similar to any community, you can find them locally, you can find them globally. They have open design, open development, open transparency. Some of the communication that goes on between them goes on mailing lists or IRC. A lot of that information is archived or available later. It's designed so that people can chime in whenever they want from anywhere in the world. So how do you get folks in your company to contribute back to open source, and how do you get people on board? These are some of the things that have worked for us and some of the things that we're working on. So raising awareness. We have a Slack channel with about 400 folks on it. We started it about a year ago. We had 50. We really started trying to get people joining it around the summertime. But even the Cloud Foundry channel, for example, has, I think I checked recently, 1,021 members. We have a GitHub channel that has 1,000 members, an OpenStack channel that has 1,400 members. So we have all these Slack channels, and we're building communities. It's really helped us with raising awareness. We have an internal open source portal where we have all of our documentation. It's meant to be just a one-stop shop for everybody to come find all things open source at Comcast. Streamlining processes for contribution. This is an area that Nithya just talked about, making it easier. We want to be developer advocates. We don't want our developers and engineers to be going through hoops and battling with our legal teams or faxing 20-page letters to try to get their contributions. We want to be the buffer in between and make it super easy for contributions to happen. And this is a work in progress. We're continuously trying to update. We get feedback from our developers and we ask them, hey, how did it go? How, your turnaround time now went from like 6 weeks to 2 weeks. How was that for you? And so we're constantly looking for feedback to improve that. Fostering inclusiveness. So I have an example. I had a colleague who was a project manager, and she was working as our Agile Scrum Master, and she was dabbling with some code. And she came to me one day and said, hey, is it okay if I contribute towards open source? And I said, yeah, of course. So we sat together, and we got all of her tools installed, and she ended up putting in a pull request for this project. And it was merged within 3 days. She was really, really excited about it. And then a couple months later, I found out that she was one of the top contributors for this project. So really, really important to make everybody aware about it and also let them know that it's not just for your developers. There's so many ways you can contribute back to open source. I remember when I first started with open source, I didn't really know Python, and it was for the OpenStack project. And so I found areas where I could help. It turns out that there's so many, if you ask, people will let you know what you can do to help. Internal training. So after we had this one-on-one session with my colleague and she was able to get a PR in and she was becoming a top committer, we thought, what about letting everybody know that we can do a training or a luncheon or something where they can sit down and put in a commit or put in a PR. So we had a Get and Garrett lunch and learn at work. And I don't know, it was packed. I don't know if they came for the free food or if they came for the training, but everybody had a pull request in by the end. So we gave them some prereqs. We said, hey, here are the tools that you need to install. I don't care if you have Windows, Mac, but these are the tools, this is what you need. So everybody came prepared to put in a PR. And so we did, we found that that was really, really helpful. Generating reports. This is an area that we are trying to focus on for 2018. We think it's important to reward and recognize achievements, and we want to be able to find out who our top committers are, what projects we're actually contributing to. It's a very manual process right now. We're going through GitHub and we're looking at what people are doing, or we're going through our open source contribution requests, which is through a ticketing portal. We're pulling reports and finding out who our contributors are. But we really want to make sure that we have an easier way to do that. So if anybody has a great way to pull those reports, please talk to us afterwards. We're always looking to improve. And recognizing and rewarding. So if you have engineers or developers who are being rewarded or recognized or getting promoted because they're doing patents, we should be doing the same for open source. And so that's another initiative we're working on. We want to make our executives, our leaders, our management, middle management, everybody on board with this open source contribution journey that we have in upstream community. And where would open source projects be without company backing? We're not really sure, but probably not as thriving and bursting community as maybe we think. So it's really important for companies to work together with these open source communities. And this picture is interesting because if you look at it, it's pretty diverse. That's another thing that we try to focus on within our team. Nithya is actually on the board for the Linux Foundation, and she tries to make sure that the pipeline for inclusivity is there. She tries to help make sure if there are opportunities to see how we can be involved. I think there's Code Chicks, there's Women of Open Source, Women of OpenStack. We try to actively be involved in these communities. And another area where open source really shines is with recruiting and talent acquisition. We actually have our talent acquisition team member here at this event, and we find that a lot of developers, they like to work on cool technology. And so having stuff that's open source, we can always showcase what we're working on. They're aware. Have you ever had to go to a job interview and you have no idea what technology you're going to be working on? You just kind of see these, canned job description. But with open source, you can really, really showcase the stuff that you're working on. And then making these policies easier. I have a colleague of mine who met with us because he had a contribution request. And so he said to us, what? I have to fill out a form, and oh man, my old job, everything I did was upstream. I didn't have to get any approvals. I didn't have to, why are we doing this? And so we wanted to make sure that we got feedback from him after he put in his request. And he came back and said, surprisingly, it wasn't too bad. It was immediately approved, and I didn't really have to go through many hoops. And so I think it's not only for recruiting, but also retainment. And this is our Comcast.github.io GitHub Pages page. It is recently launched about, I would say, 3 or 4 months ago, and we're really proud of it because we can showcase the open source projects that we're working on. So if you are an engineer or developer or an open source contributor and you have worked on a project at Comcast and it's approved, we automatically put your stuff up on Comcast.github.io. We showcase the work there. We're actively looking for contributors for our projects. And so if anybody here in this room, feel free to jump on there. If you find something interesting that you want to work on, put in a pull request. They're very welcome. And also, this actual portal is open source too, so if you find anything you want to change, feel free to put in a pull request. But also, we have the open source jobs listed there. All the jobs that are being pulled from this portal, they're not just technical jobs, they're actually open source focused. And contact us. You can contact, if you go to the contact us link on this portal, it'll actually go to our open source team. So if Nithya and I hang out on Twitter a lot, but if you don't find us there, feel free to reach out.
So one of the things that both of us realized was that when you digitally transform as a company, it's really a cultural transformation. Everything is changed. And cultural transformation is what we've been working on so that we can better serve our customers using business intelligence, using AI, machine learning, cloud, et cetera, to bring better services, being more responsive, being more proactive, and bring better services more reliably, more innovatively, more securely to our customers. And I hope by the end of this talk, you've also had a better sense of all of the technology, all of the amazing engineering that happens in the company, and what a transformed company this is, and why we belong here at SpringOne and at Cloud Foundry and at KubeCon and all of these organizations, because we believe in these technologies, we use them ourselves, and we use this to deliver services to our customers. So thank you very much. And I think we have about 3 minutes left in case you have any questions for us or you want to go get that beer quicker. Thank you.
Thank you.